focuses on directors' ID rules and the new requirements that agencies need to be across. We will be covering off specific requirements that agencies do need to know about. I did want to just cover off some of the key issues that some agencies have actually reported to us. And it is something that agencies right around the country are actually getting confused about. First of all, there is some confusion on whether all directors actually do need to have specific directors' ID applications sorted out by this month or at the end of this month and what this actually means. So let's just cover off what the rules are around this. Essentially, a director identification number is a unique identifier that company directors, including some charity directors, require. Now, we are seeing that essentially this is causing a lot of confusion with a number of different agencies right around the country. In saying that, the reason for this is because essentially who actually needs to have a director's ID and the applications of this is a little bit confusing. A number of agencies have actually even called us this morning essentially saying, well, do we actually need to have it? Because the ACNC has actually indicated that charities don't actually need to have it. Well, what we're actually finding is that a director's identification number, a director ID, is a unique identifier that company directors, including some charity directors, require. This is actually taken directly off the ACNC website as of 9 a.m. this morning. If you go back, and you can see it on the left-hand side of the screen, it says anyone who is a director of a charity that is a company or Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander corporation will need to apply for a director identification number. This doesn't mean just charities or just companies that are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander corporations, but also private companies as well too. Basically, any company that is actually registered under the Companies Act is what we are actually seeing. Now, in saying that, it is also noteworthy that this application can actually take up to 56 business days for your applications or director's applications to actually be processed. So what do you need to do and who does this actually cover? Well, this webinar will actually cover this off and give you the information about what you need to do. What we're going to look at, as I mentioned, is who needs to apply for them and when, and what are the rules. As always, we just like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar and recorded, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So what we are going to be recommending is that you do set up your director's ID based on what information we have. You will find this in your Gemba 360 dashboard that we will update after today's session. Now, director's ID. Let's jump through. A director's ID is a unique identifier that a director will apply for once and keep forever. The idea of this is that it will prevent the use of false or fraudulent director IDs. All directors of a company registered with the Australian body, registered as a foreign company or Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander corporation, will need a director ID. And ASIC is responsible for enforcing director ID offences set out in the Corporations Act. It is actually a criminal offence if directors do not apply on time, and penalties may apply. And we will come to what the penalties actually are. So we're going to walk you through what this actually is. I will add that this information is taken directly off the ACNC site, the ASIC site, and also the ABRS site as well too. We will be adding commentary over the top of all of this just to make sure that your agency is across the requirements that it actually does need to meet. So who needs a director ID? Well, you need a director ID if you are an eligible officer of a company, a registered Australian body, or a registered foreign company under the Corporations Act, or an ATSI registered corporation registered with the Office of Indigenous Corporations. Now, what do we mean by a company and a registered Australian body? This is, I think, the part that is actually causing some charitable organisations some confusion. So essentially, if your agency is registered under the Corporations Act, whether that is a company, whether it is a registered Australian body, or if it is a registered foreign corporation. All of these are registered under the Companies or the Corporations Act, and consequently, you do need to apply as a director. If you're registered under things like an Associations Incorporations Act in some states and territories, but are not registered as an AR registered company, then you won't need to apply for a director's ID, but you can still be a charity. That being said, all other agencies, being a company, a registered Australian body, or a registered foreign company, and an ATSI registered corporate do need to apply for a director's ID. And now, who does this actually apply for? Well, an eligible officer needs to apply for a director's ID. Now, that means that you are a director of the company, you are an alternate director, and as part of that, you will only ever need to apply for one director's ID. It is not like a working with children check or police check that is done every year. It is an ID number that is assigned to you. You can and you must have your directors apply on their own. You must apply for your own director's ID to verify your own identity. No one can actually apply on your behalf. We can, as a law firm, support your agency in documentation, making submissions, etc. But essentially, the issue comes back to that each director must actually verify their own identity as well too. Now, essentially, all the things that I've just mentioned here, again, just to clarify, you need a director ID if you're a director of either a company, an ASCII registered corporation, a corporate trustee, for example, of a self-managed super fund, a charity, or a not-for-profit organisation that is a company or ATSI registered corporation. It also means registered Australian bodies, for example, as I mentioned, an incorporated association that is also registered with ASIC. So you might be an association, for example, but you're also registered with ASIC because your agency also works interstate or trades outside its registered state or territory. A little bit confusing, but essentially that is the key difference here. So that's where for some agencies, they've called us going, hang on, this is a bit confusing because I thought the ACNC said we don't actually have to do it. Well, it only applies if your agency is registered with ASIC as a company, fills these requirements, corporate trustee, or you're an association that is actually registered with ASIC because you're actually doing work outside your own state or territory. What's also important, and I will come to this a bit later, is that when you do look at ABN lookups and the likes, you might find that your agency or your charity is actually registered with ASIC, but it doesn't actually provide services interstate outside your own state or territory. And it might be a historical registration that you might have. So it is important that you just be aware of this. Again, if you don't actually make these applications, then essentially you may find that your directors are in breach as of the end of this month. So it is incredibly important that your agencies just be aware of what their rules and requirements actually are. Now, meeting your obligations. How do directors actually do this? Well, your directors' obligations include applying for a director ID within the relevant time frame for your situation. So again, what this means, strictly looking at the ARBS information, again, we are talking of about 56 days in terms from the date that the application is met. So even if you make an application, let's say today, after today's webinar, again, it may take 56 days to actually process, but you have got made the application within the relevant time frame. Applying for a director ID, if directed by a registrar to do so, whether that it be with ASIC, whether it be by the ACNC, or whether that be by ORIC as well too, the different regulators, and making sure that you don't misrepresent your director ID to a Commonwealth body, registered Australian body, or ATSI corporation as well too. So there are policy requirements that directors now need to follow, and we will be circulating a template policy that your agency can adopt as well too after today's session, specifically about managing directors' ID. Now, how do you check your agency compliance info? Well, one of the ways to in fact do this is to actually look at the ABN lookup, and it is a public register. We're not saying anything that's secret or something new that you should not already know about, but essentially you can actually look up your ABN. You can look at whether it does have an company number, whether it does have an ARBN, or whether you're a registered foreign company as well too. If you're also a registered with the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations, with ORIC, for example, then again, you may have an ICN number that you may need to quote. Now, what do we need to look at in terms of the policy rules? Well, anyone who is a director of a charity that is a company or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander corporation will need to apply for a director ID number. This will be a 15-digit identifier that a director will apply for once and keep forever. You can apply for this director ID online using your MyGov account, and we'll come to, if directors don't have a MyGov account, what to actually do. And when you need to apply for director ID will depend on when you were appointed. Now, going back, essentially, if appointed under the Corporations Act, then from 1st of November last year to 4th of April, you must apply within 28 days of being appointed. If you've been appointed after the 5th of April, then you must apply before being appointed. Now, if you were appointed before or on the 31st of October 2021, then you must apply by the 30th of November 2022. So that is coming up very, very soon, hence the reason that we are running this legal webinar. Now, if you're a director of an ATSI registered corporation, then you will have longer to apply for as well too. Now, there have been some frequently asked questions that I also do want to cover off. Firstly, questions are, am I required to provide my director ID to ASIC or companies? Now, there is currently no requirement to provide your director ID to ASIC or to the companies you're director of. But what you do need to do is to actually keep up to date with this information. While there is no, so this is essentially information that ASIC has provided. Now, I will add to this though, from a company secretariat point of view or a compliance point of view for your own agencies, while there is no requirement for your directors to supply it to the companies, in your case, the agencies that you're essentially managing, then what we have suggested to agencies already, exactly like all of you, is to have a policy document that asks directors for their director's ID, like you would do with a working with children check or police check. The idea is that essentially what you are doing is managing the compliance and governance of your agency and ensuring that your directors are up to date with their requirements. No different than a working with children check or a police check. Now, are there any changes to existing company notification requirements? Essentially, no. The director ID requirement does not replace or change any existing requirements to keep company records up to date. What it is about notifying the directors themselves directly. What are the director ID offences and penalties? Well, let's run through this. The ABRS will provide support and guidance to directors to assist them to understand and meet their director ID obligation. We are obviously running training sessions and also will update our training on the Jemba College to ensure that you meet all of these requirements as well too. Essentially, the fines are summarised here. Failure to have a director ID when required to do so is a breach under the Corporations Act of Section 1272C. And essentially, the maximum penalties both are criminal and civil. So essentially, criminal is $13,200 and civil charges is just over $1 million. Failure to apply for a director ID when directed by the registrar, again, it is up to $13,200 or $1.1 million for civil charges as well too. Now, in order to essentially do this, there are steps that you need to follow in terms of gathering your documents. And we have summarized these here. If you have a MyGov account, then again, directors need to submit it via their tax file numbers and also confirm their ATO information. If they also have the other documents they need to look at, which is their bank account, an ATO notice, an APRA super fund account details, a dividend statement, a settling payment, or a PAYG summary. So these are some of the documents, and we have a checklist in Gemba that you can also use to make sure that your directors gather their right information. Now, you can also they are required to complete this online, and they must do this by the 30th of November. Now, if they do not have a MyGov account, what do you do? Because they might live inside Australia or they might live outside Australia as well. Now, if they live inside Australia, then again, they can actually use other primary and secondary identifications, but they will need to contact the directory directly, which will be to apply by phone to the ABRS and contact them directly on actually submitting their residential information, plus a number of other documents they will be asked to submit. If they are outside Australia, then again, they can essentially go through a process of making an application using this application link as well. We do and we will send all of this information out by email for yourselves to be able to access. And again, this information and up-to-date information, versions of these forms are actually located in your Gemba dashboard. Now, keep in mind, it does take up to 56 days for applications to be processed, and essentially people are reminded not to make second applications. Now, the other thing that we have been asked is what happens if we need an extension because you are gathering information and you don't have some of these documents available. Then again, you can use this form, which is to apply for an extension of time to apply for director ID. And again, this can be found on your Gemba dashboard. We are just updating this, and you will have access to this form, which will give you the latest form to use. Again, we've got this information in the policy document, so you can actually access this directly. As always, what we do recommend is to review this webinar, set up your director's ID, especially if you meet the requirements, and hopefully this addresses some of the confusion we have seen in terms of what the charities register, ACNC have put out, and also ASIC have put out as well too, in terms of why some charities or not-for-profit agencies may be required to apply for directors' IDs and some may not. What we also suggested that you do is review the Gemba 360 dashboard materials. We do have all of these resources online, and you can revisit them as well too. I will add that we are also providing updated training modules that your directors can access in terms of meeting their future director ID obligations as well. If you do have any questions, then by all means, please reach out to us on our contact numbers here. My direct number is listed here, which is 0413 699 515, or you can email us at support@gemba360.com. I'm more than happy to stay online and answer any questions that you might have. If you are watching this recording after today's live session and have any questions, then by all means, please reach out to us on 1300 360 360, or you can email us at support@gemba360.com. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have opened up the recording.